A mad tea party. There was a table set out under a tree in front of the house, and the March Hare and the Hatter were having tea at it. The Dormouse was sitting between them, fast asleep, and the other two were using it as a cushion, resting their elbows on it and talking over its head. Very uncomfortable, the Dormouse, thought Alice. Only as it's asleep, I suppose it doesn't mind. The sound was a large one, but the three were all crowded together at one corner of it. No room, they cried out when they saw Alice coming. There's plenty of room, Alice said indignantly, and she sat down in a large armchair at one end of the table. Have some wine, the March Hare said in an encouraging tone. Alice looked all around the table, but there was nothing on it but tea. I don't see any wine, she remarked. There isn't any, said the March Hare. Then it wasn't very civil of you to offer it, said Alice angrily. It wasn't very civil of you to sit down without being invited, said the March Hare. I didn't know it was your table, said Alice. It laid for a great many more than three. Your hair wants cutting, said the Hatter. He had been looking at Alice for some time with great curiosity, and this was his first speech. You should learn not to make personal remarks, Alice said with some severity. It's very rude. The Hatter opened his eyes very wide on hearing this, but all he said was, Why is a raven like a writing desk? Come, we shall have some fun now, thought Alice. I'm glad they've begun to asking riddles. I believe I can guess that, she added aloud. Do you mean that you think you can find the answer to it? Said the March Hare. Exactly so, said Alice. Then you should say what you mean, the March Hare went on. I do, Alice hastily replied. At least I mean what I say. That's the same thing, you know. Not the same thing a bit, said the Hatter. Why, you might just as well say that I see what I eat is the same thing as I eat what I see. You might just as well say, added the March Hare, that I like what I get is the same thing as I get what I like. You might just as well say, added the Dormouse, who seemed to be talking in his sleep, that I breathe when I sleep is the same thing as I sleep when I breathe. It is the same thing with you, said the Hatter, and here the conversation dropped, and the party sat silent for a minute, while Alice thought over all she could remember about the ravens and writing desks, which wasn't much. The Hatter was the first to break the silence. What a day of the month it is, he said, turning to Alice. He had taken his watch out of his pocket, and was looking at it uneasily, shaking it very now and then, and holding it to his ear. Alice considered a little, and said, The 4th? 2 days wrong, sighed the Hatter. I told you butter wouldn't suit the works, he added, looking angry at the March Hare. It was the best butter, the March Hare neckily replied. Yes, but some of the crumbs must have gotten as well, the Hatter grumbled. You shouldn't have put it in there with a bread knife. The March Hare took the watch and looked at it gloomily. Then he dipped it into his cup of tea and looked at it again, but he could think of nothing better to say than his first remark. It was the best butter, you know. Alice had been looking over her shoulder with some curiosity. What a funny watch, she remarked. It tells the day of the month, and doesn't tell what o'clock it is. Why should it? Muttered the Hatter. Does your watch tell you what year it is? Of course not, Alice replied very readily. But that's because it's the same year for such a long time together. Which is just the case with mine, said the Hatter. Alice felt dreadfully puzzled. The Hatter's remark seemed to her to have some sort of meaning in it, and yet it was certainly English. I don't quite understand you, she said as politely as she could. The Dormouse is asleep again, said the Hatter, and he poured a little hot tea on its nose. The Dormouse shook its head impatiently and said without opening its eyes, Of course, just what I was going to remark myself. Have you guessed the riddle yet? The Hatter said, turning to Alice again. No, I give up, Alice replied. What's the answer? I haven't the slightest idea, said the Hatter. Nor I, said the March Hare. Alice sighed wearily. I think you might do something better with your time, she said, than waste it asking riddles that have no answers. If you knew time as well as I do, said the Hatter, you wouldn't talk about wasting it. It's him. I don't know what you mean, Alice said. Of course you don't, the Hatter said, tossing his head. I dare you say you never spoke to time. Perhaps not, Alice casually replied, but I know I have to beat time when I learn music. Ah, he accounts for it, said the Hatter. He won't stand beating. Now if you only kept on good terms with him, he'd do almost anything you liked with the clock. For instance, suppose it was 9 o'clock in the morning, just time to begin lessons. You'd only have to whisper to hint time, and round goes the clock in a twinkling 1:30 time for dinner. I only wish it was, the March Hare said, in itself a whisper. That would be grand, certainly, said Alice thoughtfully, but then I shouldn't be angry for it, you know. Not at first, perhaps, said the Hatter, but you could keep it 1:30 as long as you like. Is that the way you manage? Alice asked. The Hatter shook his head mournfully. Not I, he replied. We quarreled last March, just before he went mad, you know, pointing with his teaspoon at the March Hare. It was a great concert given by the Queen of Hearts, and I had to sing. You know the song, perhaps? I've heard something like it, Alice said. It goes, you know, Hatter continued, in the way. Up above the world you fly, like a tea-tray in the sky. Twinkle, twinkle. Here the Dormouse shook itself and began singing in its sleep. Twinkle, 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 and went on so long that they had to pinch it to make him stop. Well, I hardly finished the first verse, said the Hatter, when the Queen bawled out, He's murdering the time, off with his head. How dreadfully savage, exclaimed Alice. And ever since that, the Hatter went on in a mourning tone. He won't do a thing I ask. It's always 6 o'clock now. A bright idea came to Alice's head. Is that the reason so many tea things are put out here? She asked. Yes, that is, said Hatter with a sigh. It's always tea time, and we've no time to wash the things between whiles. Then you keep moving round, I suppose, said Alice. Exactly so, said the Hatter, as things get used up. But when you come to the beginning again, Alice ventured to ask, suppose we change the subject. March Hare interrupted, yawning. I'm getting tired of this. I vote the young lady tells us a story. I'm afraid I don't know one, Alice said, rather alarmed at the proposal. Then Dormouse shall, they both cried. Wake up, Dormouse, and then pinched it on both sides at once. Dormouse slowly opened his eyes. I wasn't asleep, he said in a hoarse, feeble voice. I heard every word you fellows were saying. Tell us a story, said the March Hare. Yes, please do, pleaded Alice. And be quick about it, added the Hatter, or you'll be asleep again before it's done. Once upon a time there were 3 little sisters, the Dormouse began, in a great hurry, and their names were Elise, Lacey, and Tilly, and they lived in the bottom of a well. What did they live on? Alice asked, who always took great interest in questions of eating and drinking. They lived on a treacle, said the Dormouse, after thinking a minute or two. They couldn't have done that, you know, Alice gently remarked. They have all been ill. So they were, said the Dormouse, very ill. Alice tried a little fancy to herself what such an extraordinary way of living would be like, but it puzzled her too much, so she went on. But why did they live at the bottom of a well? Take some more tea, said the March Hare, said Alice, very earnestly. I've had nothing yet, Alice replied in an offended tone, so I can't take any more. You mean you can't take less, said the Hatter. It's very easy to take more. Then no, nothing. Nobody asked your opinion, said Alice. Who's making personal remarks now? The Hatter asked triumphantly. Alice did not quite know what to say to this, so she did help herself some tea and bread and butter, and then turned to the Dormouse and repeated her question. Why did they live at the bottom of a well? The Dormouse again took a minute or two to think about it, and then said, it was a treacle well. There is no such thing, Alice was beginning very angrily, but the Hatter and the March Hare went shh, shh, and the Dormouse sulkily remarked, If you can't be civil, you'd better finish the story yourself. No, please go on, Alice said, very humbly. I won't interrupt again. I dare say there may be one. One indeed, said the Dormouse. However, he consented to go on. And so these 3 sisters, they were learning to draw, you know. What did they draw? Said Alice, quite forgetting her promise. Treacle, said the Dormouse, without considering it at all this time. I want to clean up, interrupted the Hatter. Let's all move one place. He moved on and spoke. The Dormouse followed him. The March Hare moved into the Dormouse place, and Alice, rather unwillingly, took the place of the March Hare. The Hatter was the only one who got any advantage from the change, and Alice was a good deal worse off than before, as the March Hare had just upset the milk jug into his plate. Alice did not wish to offend the Dormouse again, so she began very cautiously. "But I don't understand. Where did they draw the treacle from?" "You can draw water out of the water well," said the Hatter. "So I should think you could draw a trickle out of the trickle well. Eh, stupid?" "But they were in the well," said Alice to the Dormouse, not choosing to notice the last remark. "Of course they were," said the Dormouse. "Well in." The answer so confused poor Alice that she let the Dormouse go in for some time without interrupting it. "They were learning to draw," the Dormouse went on, yawning and rubbing its eyes, for it was getting very sleepy. "And they were drew all the manner things, everything that begins with M." "Why with M?" said Alice. "Why not?" said the March Hare. Alice went silent. The Dormouse had closed its eyes by the time and was going off into a doze. But on being pinched by the Hatter, it woke up again with a little shriek and went on. "That begins with M, such as mousetraps, and the moon, and memory, and munches. You know you say things are munch of munchness. Did you ever see a thing drawing of munchness?" "Really now you ask me," said Alice, very confused. "I don't think." "Then you shouldn't talk," said the Hatter. This piece of rudeness was more than Alice could bear. She got up in great disgust and walked off. The Dormouse fell asleep instantly, and neither of the others took the least notice of her going, though she looked back once or twice, half hoping that they would call after her. The last time she saw them, they were trying to put the Dormouse into a teapot. "At any rate, I'll never go there again," said Alice as she picked her way through the wood. "It's the stupidest tea party I ever was at in all my life." Just as she said this, she noticed that one of the trees had a door leading right into it. "That's very curious," she thought, "but everything curious today. I think I may as well go in at once." And in she went. Once more she found herself in a long hall, and close to the little glass table. "Now I'll manage better this time," she said to herself, and began by taking the little golden key and unlocking the door that led into the garden. Then she went to work nibbling the mushrooms. She had kept a piece of it in front of her pocket, till she was about a foot high. Then she walked down the little passage, and then she found herself at last in the beautiful gardens, among the bright flower beds and the cool fountain.